Croatian party palace designed to attract the rich and infamous.
His penthouse pets were serving caviar and lobster on silver platters.
A high-security forest complex in Poland infiltrated from within.
First came the greatest challenge of all, assassinating one of the most heavily guarded men in the world.
Shadowy tunnels on England's south coast, manned as a last line of defense.
This is a time when great things were asked of ordinary people.
And a strange facility in Armenia that made one controversial scientist a star.
Where he claimed there is no evidence for the Big Bang in the universe. I mean, it was really audacious.
Decaying relics. Ruins of lost worlds. Sites haunted by the past. Their secrets waiting to be revealed. On the coast of the Adriatic Sea, a derelict paradise hints at memories of the greatest luxury.
Croatia's coastline is one of the jewels of the Adriatic.
This region draws millions of tourists every summer for its natural beauty.
What's out of the ordinary here is that on this thriving coast, you see this husk of a giant ruin.
You expect to see new developments popping up all along this coast, not the opposite.
This decaying complex was once a den of debauchery.
It was definitely lavish, it was extravagant, it was out of the context of the whole Yugoslavia.
These walls saw world leaders, obscene parties, and the grand vision of an adult industry mogul.
This was the main hall where people would meet. Now everything is missing, of course.
Anna Micic has seen this building loom over the town beach for decades.
It was a place where people could come, enjoy, and indulge themselves.
In 1970, this is not the Croatia we know today, but part of the Socialist Federal Republic of Yugoslavia.
And this part of the world had strict limitations on any foreign investment, especially from the US.
Yugoslavia had one little loophole, and that allowed for foreign investment in casinos and gambling. The catch, though, was that it was only foreigners who could participate, not the local Yugoslavians.
Back then in Yugoslavia, casinos were something that wasn't something regular. It was completely new, actually, at that time.
This opportunity caught the eye of an eccentric tycoon looking to invest his millions in the hospitality industry. His name was Bob Guccione.
The American had made his fortune in publishing, and if you're wondering what he was publishing, well, there's a clue in the name of the casino.
The casino was named after Guccione's adult magazine.
Guccione started Penthouse magazine in 1965 to compete with Hugh Hefner's Playboy magazine.
The magnate saw an opportunity to expand his brand into hospitality, envisioning a resort of debauchery and indulgence behind the Iron Curtain.
In 1972, he put his vision to the test, with an eye on the newly built Haludovo Palace Hotel.
So Guccione invests $48 million into this resort. And it becomes, for a brief time when it opens in 1972, the swinging place to be in Europe.
It's probably the most extravagant resort ever opened in a communist country.
Welcome to the Haludovo. As it would be back in 1970s, and you can see it's all magnificent view and area. Everything is so monumental. And on the right side, there would be a reception where we would check in as guests with the polite and beautiful stuff that Haludovo had.
These were not just any staff members. They were central to Guccione's plans.
Guccione envisions his hostesses at this casino very much like the Playboy bunnies of the Hugh Hefner Playboy empire. But the problem is, where does he find these penthouse pets in a very conservative communist country?
So what he ends up doing is recruiting local girls and dressing them up in French-made outfits to play host to his international clientele.
Even though the families were against girls working here, the girls still did it.
They don't think very well about this job, but I explained them about this job. It's a well job, it's a good job.
I think because they just wanted to feel this Western civilization, this Western way of living, Western way of having fun.
So his penthouse pets were serving caviar and lobster on silver platters and then going home to their regular houses in Yugoslavia, which, I mean, I imagine must have been quite a shock.
The resort would immediately attract some of the biggest names in the world.
The guests included Italian Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi and even a rising young Iraqi politician named Saddam Hussein. Former employees say that Saddam Hussein once left a $2,000 tip for a waitress, and that on one occasion, the whole Iraqi envoy was held up when his son left a golden revolver in one of the hotel rooms.
On my right is actually what was a pool. Apparently that famous pool that once was filled with champagne.
To Guccione, the hotel represented more than just a commercial venture.
It was envisioned as a place of colliding the cultures from East and West.
While Nixon was in Moscow and Peking, Guccione was on the shores of Yugoslavia, conducting his own form of capitalist diplomacy.
Guccione seems to have truly believed that this place would be a way to bridge the divide between Russia and the West, and possibly even contribute to ending the Cold War.
He even described his penthouse pets as the peace force of the new world.
Penthouse is out to win the Cold War with sex. And I think that in the end, isn't it better to do it with sex and love and beautiful girls than with guns?
With $48 million tied up in the hotel, it was Guccione's first major investment beyond his magazine, and he wasn't holding back. He wanted his guests to have the complete experience.
Guccione almost hired a New York plastic surgeon who'd invented a new facelift procedure to work at the hotel's beauty spa, before he found out that this surgeon didn't even have a medical license.
But not long after its opening, it became clear the good times wouldn't last.
Reality was the hotel couldn't attract enough business from foreign visitors to support all of its lavish offerings. They also found it incredibly hard to import all the Western food and comfort that their guests had come to expect.
He couldn't get his guests, Americans mostly, he couldn't get them the things they wanted, like the exclusive things they wanted.
After a year of massive overspending, Haludovo Hotel declared bankruptcy in 1973 and ended its relationship with Guccione.
This wouldn't be the last of Guccioni's bad investments. A $200 million Atlantic City casino never materialized. And a historical erotic film, Caligula, starring Malcolm McDowell and Helen Mirren, proved a major flop. For this once penthouse paradise, bankruptcy was just the beginning of its downfall.
The days of extravagance were over. The hotel scaled back its operations and kept hosting guests, but to much less fanfare.
After that, it was operational for a couple of more years, and then new owner canceled all the reservations and started selling the furniture, the cutleries, the sheets, and everything from the hotel to the locals. And the end result is this, unfortunately.
Today, the future of the Haludovo Palace Hotel is far from certain. A multi-million-dollar renovation project is in the works, but it's one the nearby town's residents are fiercely battling against.
The issue is that the current owner's plans would involve closing off the waterfront path that's been open to the locals of Malinska for decades.
Back then, when the country was closed, it was open to mingle, and everything was really open. And now, when we are living in a free country, we want to close something and make it exclusive. It doesn't make any sense. So I really sincerely hope that this will stay for the locals and for the old people to enjoy this, not just the guests from the hotel.
In the dense forests of Poland are the battered remnants of a notorious complex.
We are in Masuria, northeastern Poland, and as you get away from the towns and the main roads, you notice these vast objects looming out of the woods.
Some of these structures go way up into the canopy, but there's no windows present. The buildings look intentionally hidden away.
Interior spaces reveal little, but the destruction wrought on this place is plain to see.
There are no craters or bullet holes to suggest that a battle took place here. So what could have happened to these buildings?
This was a place that was built to be hidden from the enemy, but in the end, the real threat would come from the inside.
This damaged complex is now iconic because of a plot carried out here that was part of Operation Valkyrie.
This is Wolf's Lair.
It was really, really big complex. They built more than 60 different kinds of buildings.
Not many people know this site as well as local guide Jadwiga Korovai.
So this is the ruins of Hitler's bunker. It was very secret where Hitler was staying. Local people didn't know about this.
Hitler would end up spending nearly half of his time here during the Second World War. And it was built in preparation for the largest land invasion in history.
In 1940, Germany was deep into the planning of Operation Barbarossa, the invasion and conquest of the Soviet Union, which Hitler envisaged as the epic, pivotal campaign of the war. He was going to need a new headquarters close to this vital Eastern Front that he was getting ready to open.
A top-secret site was chosen in the middle of the Masurian woods, in what was then a German province.
The site was only accessible by a single railway line and a small airstrip.
Locals were told that the construction was for a new cement factory, and they couldn't have possibly imagined that the fate of the modern world was being planned just down the road from them.
The 22nd of June, 1941, Operation Barbarossa is launched. A few days later, Hitler arrives at his new headquarters. Soon, Wolf's Lair starts to resemble a small city.
At its height, this place was buzzing with the work of 2,000 German military officials planning every aspect of the Eastern Front.
Yet, it wasn't only a place of work.
This place was like home for them because they've got place to eat, they've got sauna, cinema, or watch newsreels or propaganda film.
In anticipation of an Allied air attack, it became one of the most heavily guarded places in the world, with 3 security zones surrounding Hitler's bunker.
There was a flak bunker with this 2 turret for machine gun was on the top. So soldiers who were staying on the top could control and protect Hitler's place.
But ironically, the real threat came from within.
Even before war broke out in Europe, there were groups within the German army and the intelligence community plotting to overthrow Hitler.
This was a group with a diverse list of reasons for wanting to depose Hitler. Whether they were conservative elites who had been sidelined by the Nazis, or elements within the military who were horrified by the atrocities against civilians.
Operation Barbarossa dragged on longer than Hitler expected. And when it ended in failure in December 1941, a new conspiratorial group formed. One of its central figures was Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg.
Stauffenberg was really respected here because he looks very, how to say, as a brave person. He lost his right hand, one eye in African front with Erwin Rommel when he was fighting. So after this, he had medal, and then people respect him and didn't expect that such person could do, such stuff with Hitler.
As Germany's position deteriorated, it fueled his opposition to the Nazi regime.
Klaus von Stauffenberg had fought in Operation Barbarossa, but after the disastrous Battle of Stalingrad, had become convinced that assassinating Hitler was the only way forward for Germany.
By 1944, Stauffenberg and his co-conspirators were ready to act.
The key to the plot centered around a plan the Nazis already had in place, Operation Valkyrie.
This was a contingency plan to put the whole country under the charge of the reserve army in case there was some type of widespread civil disorder. But the plotters planned to use this setup as an excuse and as a mechanism to seize control of the country.
If the coup ended in success, a new government would be formed with the aim of negotiating peace with the Allies. But the stakes couldn't have been higher.
First came the greatest challenge of all, assassinating one of the most heavily guarded men in the world.
The conspirators needed a place where they could get close enough to Hitler to kill him.
It was clear that the Wolf's Lair was going to be the place, and that von Stauffenberg was the man to carry out the actual act.
On the 20th of July, 1944, Stauffenberg entered Wolf's Lair. In his hand, a briefcase, and inside it, a bomb.
Von Stauffenberg had already made multiple trips to the bunker for military conferences, but he was waiting for Hitler, Heinrich Himmler, and Hermann Goering all to be there in the same place at the same time.
12:30 p.m. Hitler and his top Nazi officials gather for a briefing.
When Stauffenberg came in, he saw huge table and people around 24 people. Here also was a Hitler in the middle of the table. So he put briefcase under the table and he had to leave because he knew that soon will be explosion.
But a tiny movement under the table would have massive consequences.
It's presumed that someone pushed the bomb aside with their foot, unknowingly deflecting the blast from its primary target.
The bomb detonates at 12:42 and killing the stenographer instantly. 3 will later die, but as fate would have it, Hitler survives, his only injury a perforated eardrum.
Stauffenberg was already on his way back to Berlin, believing Hitler was dead.
What happened next? 2 p.m. was called Heinrich Himmler and they started investigation. So they knew that was one person lost, Stauffenberg. What happened with Stauffenberg? He joined opposition in Berlin about 5 p.m. and they started Operation Valkyria to take power.
The conspirators put Operation Valkyrie into immediate effect. And for some hours, the coup continued, with troops occupying Nazi offices and arresting SS officers.
But then the news came that Hitler had survived.
It didn't take long before the jig was up, and Hitler was retaking control of the situation.
Hitler had the plotters rounded up and executed, and some suffered the horrific death of being hanged from beams with piano wire while their executions were filmed for Hitler to enjoy.
Hitler may have survived the 20th of July plot, but the walls were closing in.
That October, the Russians reached East Prussia. And in November 1944, Hitler left the Wolf's Lair for the last time, the enemy hot on his heels.
A top-ranking Nazi official ordered the complex be destroyed so it wouldn't fall into enemy hands.
But these were concrete behemoths with 6 feet thick walls. One bunker alone required some 18,000 pounds of TNT. Most were only partially destroyed due to their immense size and reinforcements.
On the 27th of January 1945, the Red Army entered Wolf's Lair without firing a single shot. Today, the abandoned complex hosts around 300,000 visitors every year.
The Wolf's Lair was built to be a place of triumph, the ultimate victory of the Third Reich over its greatest enemy. But instead, it was a scene where Hitler's own generals attempted to assassinate him, and he eventually had to flee with his rival literally chasing him at his tail.
Carved into central Armenia's mountainous landscape is a shimmering crater.
We're in a quiet town on the slopes of Mount Araguts. Nearby is a 13th century monastery, and then something that's been built clearly as part of the space age.
A shiny, metallic, inverted dome embedded right in the hillside.
Inside the adjacent buildings, there's control stations with knobs and levers, like something out of a Jules Verne novel.
The place has this otherworldly quality, like some kind of outpost designed to communicate with aliens.
This structure is the brainchild of one of Armenia's most renowned scientists.
The man behind this was willing to challenge some of the most established scientific ideas of our day.
The town of Orgov is home to this impressive construction. It was invented by Aravik Sargsyan's uncle, the famous scientist Paris Misakovich Hiruni.
Вся моя научная жизнь связана с радиотелескопом, созданным Hiruni. Кстати, он так и называется – зеркальный радиотелескоп Hiruni.
She's been campaigning for decades to preserve her uncle's work and bring the revolutionary instrument back to life.
Тепло одной свечи, зажженной в Токио, в Японии, может почувствовать наша антенна.
Paris Hiruni's scientific ambitions began in his school days in Soviet Armenia.
Growing up in Armenia, part of the Soviet Union, if you wanted to get a world-class scientific education, you had to go to Moscow. Hiruni went to Moscow, studied physics, and received a PhD. He wrote his PhD thesis about his conception for a new kind of radio telescope.
Именно тогда, уже в начале 60-х, сформировалась его мечта построить радиотелескоп, инструмент, благодаря которому можно будет проводить радиоастрономические наблюдения космоса в Армении.
Hiruni's dream would test an entirely unique design.
The challenge for any kind of space telescope, of course, is that Earth is not stationary. It's constantly moving. So if you want to watch a particular star for more than a couple of seconds, your telescope has to move with that star.
If you think about how a radio telescope works, it's a massive dish raised off the ground with a focal point, which would essentially move around.
Hiruni had this idea that instead of moving the dish, you could just move the part of the telescope that's receiving the signal. So he thought, why not dig that dish into the Earth?
The physicist defended his PhD by building a working 15-feet model, but his ultimate goals were much grander.
Hiruni's dreams would have to wait, however. His skills were needed elsewhere.
Еще в период Холодной войны наука и техника Советского Союза конкурировала с наукой и техникой Соединенных Штатов и Армении.
Hiruni gathered antenna technology from across the Soviet Union and put it together to create this more advanced, more sophisticated antenna. This antenna is going to help them better track aircraft and better be able to shoot down enemy aircraft.
Aravik believes that this work played a critical role in the Vietnam War, helping the Soviet Union, one of Vietnam's strongest allies, destroy American planes. But Hiruni's focus remained on his grand plan for a telescope.
Hiruni had the drive and the passion to actually convince the authorities in Armenia to back him on this plan, and then to get the funding as part of the Soviet Union, the millions of dollars it would take to actually build this telescope.
Проект был готов очень рано, но Hiruni понадобилось 17 лет для того, чтобы получить разрешение на строительство антенны радиотелескопа.
You get a sense of what a powerful personality Hiruni must have been to convince the leaders of the Soviet science establishment to fund his expensive project here in Armenia, which to them probably seemed like a remote backwater.
Construction on the side of a mountain required specialist engineering.
They used explosives to carve out the hillside and put a concrete bowl in it.
Hiruni's radio-optical telescope was finally completed in 1985.
That was the first time Hiruni was able to turn on his telescope and see an image that his device, his invention, had received from the heavens.
Before long, the groundbreaking device would enable Hiruni to challenge one of science's most famous theories.
Буквально в первые дни своей работы, еще в 1987 году,
With his new creation, Hiruni became the first person ever to witness powerful flares coming from a red giant star. But there was one thing the telescope was unable to pick up, and it would question one of the fundamental theories of the universe.
This idea that the Big Bang left behind this residual energy is just foundational in modern astronomy. It's like Darwin's theory of evolution. And yet Hiruni, he didn't find it. He published a paper, and in that paper he claimed there is no evidence for the Big Bang in the universe. I mean, it was really audacious.
Just a few years after its inauguration, Soviet funding collapsed. But not all hope was lost.
и в течение длительного времени, лет 25, за мизерное финансирование, госбюджетное финансирование, институт весь, и в частности радиотелескоп, сохранял фактически существование благодаря энтузиазму в основном сотрудников.
The last time they turned it on was 2011. But without the funds to do the necessary work, they had to shut it down again. It's estimated it would take $25 million to make this radio telescope functional again.
Paris Hiruni passed away in 2008. He was never able to test the full capacity of his telescope design. His niece has made it her mission to bring the invention back from the dead and to continue her uncle's powerful legacy.
Борис Хируни был очень сложной и действительно выдающейся личностью. В мире, вообще в истории, известно очень мало серьезных крупных ученых, которые одновременно были великолепными менеджерами, умели увлекать и вести за собой массы. Вот Хируни был одним из таких. Он любим в народе до сих пор.
On England's southern coast lies a historic seaside town with a secret.
Ramsgate has everything that the tourist would need. A sandy beach, a promenade.
It has its own little fishing fleet, great restaurants and pubs.
Looking out along the Ramsgate beach, one can see France. We are very close to the continent of Europe.
Its location would come to put its residents in grave danger.
Poor little Ramsgate suddenly finds itself struck by major armed forces, but it has a big ace up its sleeve.
Dotted around the busy modern streets are traces of their hidden savior.
You just see the tunnel heading off into the void, and you wonder, how big is this underground world?
In the 19th century, Ramsgate was one of England's most popular and fashionable seaside towns.
Ramsgate really gets going in 1821 when it's chartered as a royal resort by the king at the time. It was a very chic, very posh place for English people to go.
In a bid to capitalize on the town's popularity and bring in more people and money, a railway company turned to the ground beneath their feet.
This tunnel was built between 1862 and 1863 as part of the Victorian railway system to bring people to the seaside.
Steve Pankhurst has been exploring the history of these tunnels for 5 years.
It's approximately a mile long in its entire length.
For over 40 years, the tunnel cemented Ramsgate as one of the go-to seaside resorts in the area. But in 1926, its use declined, and it was no longer needed. Just over a decade later, it would find a new purpose.
This tunnel becomes used for something entirely different, something that wasn't planned for by the designers.
In 1938, Ramsgate elected a new mayor, A.B.C. Kemp.
He was kind of affectionately known as the Mad Mayor, but he was this, eccentric English character with a top hat. He'd often be seen sort of wandering around the town.
Despite his strange behavior, Kemp saw what the mobilization of Europe's great militaries meant for Britain and his town.
Without him, the sort of World War II story of Ramsgate could have been very, very different.
Just over 30 miles across the water from the European continent, Kemp knew that Ramsgate would be right in the firing line. He was determined to protect his people.
People said, oh, he's crazy, but he was joined by a civil engineer, and together these guys submit these elaborate plans to build a proper tunnel system to house the whole civilian population, and 2 times it's turned down by the War Office.
People felt that the Second World War would be fought like the First World War. It would be fought on the front line between France and Germany. Not that people would be bombed out of their homes as they were drinking tea.
Finally, in the early months of 1939, as the grim reality of war with Germany edged closer, the War Office relented, giving the Mad Mayor the green light to start his ambitious project.
They began digging here in March 1939. We had nearly 2 3/4 miles of tunnel to dig, and they dug that in 8 months, start to finish. This entrance here is the entrance for this neighborhood, so the people that lived in this area would be using this shelter entrance.
And what made this tunnel system so good and innovative was that it basically patterned the above-ground town below. That's why when you go into this tunnel complex, there are all these branches off in every direction, because it's basically following the contours of the city above.
The 24th of August, 1940. Luftwaffe bombers prepare to cross the English Channel. Their target, the seaside town of Ramsgate.
This squadron of German Ju-88 2-engine bombers flying out of an airbase just north of Paris, each carrying about 16 250-pound bombs, drops their entire load on Ramsgate.
500 bombs are unleashed in just 5 minutes, but the residents are prepared. As air raid sirens wail, they flee down into the massive network of shelters.
The ground would vibrate, the tunnels would shake, people would hear it, the lights would go out, people would be plunged into darkness.
Huddled in the dank tunnels, they waited out the raid for as long as they had to.
This tunnel was home to several thousand people during the course of the air raids, but they weren't allowed to live here. What they could do was sit out of air raids or sleep overnight, and this is what the beds are for. It was quite smelly in a lot of areas because there are 500 toilets in this tunnel.
When those who had survived finally emerged, they were met with a horrifying scene.
This attack was nicknamed the Murder Raid because of its intensity and because of the devastation that it caused.
During the raid on the 24th, we lost 85 homes absolutely flattened. We had another 1,500 made uninhabitable, and that caused a huge influx of homeless people. Those 957 people had nowhere to go, and this is the result.
It would become known as Tunnel Town.
The tunnel had its own running water, its own electricity, its own barber shop. The community fashioned out of these stark and difficult circumstances with bits of wood a table here and there, a chair here and there, and from that, they survived.
And it became almost like a social underground reflection of what was actually happening on the surface in Ramsgate. At its height, there was some 300 families living down there.
There'd be a band concert going on at the other end. There'd be a canteen that was set up at the other end for people to go and enjoy a cup of tea. There would have been food cooked up there.
Despite the Blitz spirit, the dark days of war dragged on, and the primitive conditions started to take their toll.
You've got problems with food, you've got problems with sleeping, you've got problems with damp, you've got problems with mold, problems with probably rats and mice attracted by your food. So it's not easy to live down here. You would not stay here any longer than you really needed to. People with badly damaged homes would be here for years. And obviously some people were here till the end of the war.
By the end of 1944, as the Allied forces were taking the fight back to Europe and their homes were being repaired, most of Ramsgate's residents felt safe to return to the surface, and Tunnel Town was abandoned.
Ramsgate was bloodied but unbowed because we had taken on the full might of the German Air Force and survived. The lasting legacy is there are people here today because of these tunnels. One of the regular sleepers down here was Hilda Gower, and she brought her little boy, Ken Gower. This little boy grew up to be an old man. He's still alive. He has a family. All of those people are here because of this. Because Ken Gower was alive through the war, he lived down here, he survived down here, and that gave birth to a future generation of Gowers.
Soon after the war, the access tunnels were sealed up. The railway tunnel faced the same fate in the 1960s.
It wasn't until 2014 that they actually opened as a proper tourist attraction.
It speaks to the tremendous courage and endurance of the British people during World War II.
People like to think that history is something very staid and old and dusty. And really, when you get into somewhere like this is history that you can come and touch. And that's what makes this place exciting.